Hey everybody, John Wagnon here with DevCentral, and we are bringing you another Lightboard lesson video. And today we're going to talk about DNS Flag Day. It's coming up on February 1st, 2019, and we'll talk about what it is and why it's important for you and what it could do. So it's a pretty big deal in the world of DNS. All right, so a quick overview though of DNS. If you have a user out here who is at their computer and they want to access website whatever, example.com, then they're going to type in example.com in their in their browser. Example.com. Goodness, that's not a very good E. Anyway, example.com. They're going to type that in the browser. They're going to hit go, and then the domain name system, the DNS system, is going to to do what it does. And ultimately it's going to translate that fully qualified domain name into an IP address. So there's going to be a series of lookups and requests and all that stuff throughout the domain name system with these DNS servers. But ultimately it's going to say, hey, the IP address for that is whatever it is. I'm going to say 1.2.3.4. And then the user browser is going to say, okay, website 1.2.3.4, let me get your web page. And then they're going to send it over. All right. But the issue with the DNS Flag Day deals with some specifics of how the DNS system and how the software is set up. So I was going to go over just a quick overview of the DNS message header. So the DNS message header. All right. So when DNS was created back in like the 1980s, the internet was what it was back then. There, of course, has been a lot of features, a lot of functionality added to internet capability, communication, all that stuff since then. But the DNS message header was built in such a way back then that it had certain capabilities for flags and extensions and all that kind of stuff that were, at the time were fine. But when you look at it today, it's very limited in its capabilities. And it's built in such a way that we cannot add additional flags and that kind of stuff to it. So some really smart guys have figured out a way to add more capabilities to the message header to be able to get the full capabilities of what we need today. All right, so the message header, the way it's built, this is a very quick overview, but it's got various flags that are in it. And some of these may include things like QR, a QR flag, an AA flag, TC flag. There's a bunch of them, or there's not necessarily a bunch. There's a limited number of them. Alrighty, and then there's other things like a query count. There's an answer count. There's several different. I'm gonna put little lines here to kind of distinguish. There's several of these kind of a counter, if you will, sections of this. But then down here, so I'll put ... Then there's a section called additional info. All right, and in this there are sections like question, and then answer is one of them. But one of the things that has been added to this additional info portion of the DNS message header is this thing called an OPT pseudo section, or an OPT pseudo resource record. And so I'll just write it right here. So I'll put OPT, and then it's pseudo, it's the pseudo resource record. But you'll see it written OPT pseudo section, and then that's going to have stuff in it. And the thing that is interesting here with DNS Flag Day is in that OPT pseudo resource record, you're going to have this thing called eDNS. eDNS. All right, so again, this thing is actually found inside this OPT pseudo resource record, or this pseudo section. Alrighty, but the eDNS is going to have a version number, and it's typically version 0 is where we're at today. And then it's going to have flags, either enabled or not. And then it's also going to list the protocol. Typically it's UDP. And then it's going to say the byte size of that UDP packet, which is typically 512. It could be 4096, alrighty? But that's what you're going to find in the eDNS portion of the OPT pseudo section of the DNS message header. Okay. The reason that this is interesting is because this allows you to add additional flags, which, by the way, eDNS stands for Extension Mechanisms for DNS. But this allows you to add additional flags, whereas you could not have crammed them up here in the original DNS message header just because of the way it was built. So again, that's where the smart guys have figured out a way, hey, how can we get around that and add a section for flags? Alrighty. Some of the things that eDNS is used for today, probably the biggest one is DNSSEC. It's the DNS security features that are important, from a security perspective today. But you could use it for other means. Alrighty, but the issue at hand here is not all DNS servers are capable of handling this OPT pseudo section eDNS feature. All right, so again, if you had a user that's trying to get the IP address of a certain website and it goes through a series of lookups, to like its local DNS or maybe some authoritative name server or maybe even like a top-level domain like a .com or .gov or whatever DNS server, then it's going to send the DNS request, and then of course the response is going to come back. If there is a DNS server out there that does not have the capability of handling this eDNS, then typically what's happened in the past is the server that would have sent that to the server that can't handle it, maybe they would send back another request saying, hey, let's try to disable the eDNS portion of this message header, and then let's try to send this whole DNS request and response and all that stuff again without that in it. And that's worked up to a point, but now what's happening, February 1st, 2019, all of the major DNS software providers or software vendors or the major DNS providers out there in the world today have said, hey, no more, we're not going to try to work around this eDNS thing, we're going to strictly enforce eDNS. And so if your DNS server does not have the capability of handling eDNS, then typically what happens is if it does not have the capability and they don't try that whole, hey, let's just disable this part or whatever and try to work around it, then ultimately there would be a timeout message sent back from the DNS server that does not know how to handle this. So now what all these DNS providers and all that stuff around the world have finally said is they're like, hey, if there's a timeout on this eDNS thing where a DNS server can't handle this, then we're going to consider that DNS server completely dead. So we're going to stop, answering requests. We're basically going to tell the rest of the world, hey, that DNS server that can't handle it, don't even talk to that one anymore because it's totally dead. So you may ask yourself, well, why is that a big deal? Well, if the DNS server that handles all the requests for your website is suddenly marked dead by the rest of the world, then no one is going to be able to get to your website. So, I mean, that's really the end result, is that your website could potentially just be completely taken offline for all practical purposes. Unless people know the exact IP address, then they could get to it. But who in the world knows the actual IP address of a website today? You just know the name you type in your address bar, right? Or you go to Google and you just, and click on the link, but it's going to go through that same thing, the DNS lookups. All right, so that's what it is. It's this whole eDNS thing, and there's a website out there today, this DNS Flag Day. It has its own website, like any major, thing that happens on the internet today. You get your own website. But there's a testing tool on there where you can just type in your web address, so like DevCentral.f5.com, and then hit go, and it will do all the correct checks for all this stuff. Make sure all the DNS servers that serve up that web page are responding the way that they need to. If you are the one who manages the DNS server itself, you need to make sure that your software is upgraded to the point that it can handle all this stuff. And all the major software developers out there have provided versions and updates and all that to be able to handle this. You just need to make sure you get on that current version where you can handle this stuff. So again, DNS Flag Day is what they're calling it. And it deals with all this stuff where this, extension mechanism for DNS needs to be enabled because of the world we live in. The internet's a complex place. We need to be able to do more with these DNS message headers, and so this allows us to do that. It gives us more capability to do the things that we need to do today, frankly. So make sure that you're on the correct version, and make sure that your website does not go down when all these major vendors flip the switch on February 1st. So hey, thanks for hanging in there with us today on this Lightboard lesson video. If you like this thing, you can click right up here on our DC ball and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you guys out there in the community.